Keeper of this heart of mine, your patience has no end. You've loved me back into your arms time and time again. So if I start to wander like a lamb that's gone astray, I'll trust in you, shepherd of my heart. You're the beacon of my nights, you're the sunlight of my days. I can rest within your arms, I can know your loving ways. So let the cold winds blow and let the storms rage all around. I'll trust in you, shepherd of my heart. Giver of this life in me, you're what I'm living for. For all my deepest gratitude, you love me even more. So as I walk through valleys, listening for the Master's call, I'll trust in you, shepherd of my heart. You're the beacon of my nights, you're the sunlight of my days. I can rest within your arms, I can know your loving ways. So as I walk through valleys, listening for my Master's call, I'll trust in you, shepherd of my heart. I'll trust in you, shepherd of my
Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our thoughts for this morning. We're continuing to look at the affirmation statements of Jesus. Scripture readings for today are from John's Gospel, chapter 10, verses 1 to 6 and 11 to 18, and of course Psalm 23, which obviously indicates our thoughts based around Jesus saying, I am the Good Shepherd. Now, the image of the shepherd and his flock is very deeply rooted in the literature of the Old Testament. For the Jews were essentially a pastoral people. The prophets taught that Israel was God's flock and that God himself was their shepherd. And now we've come to a point where Jesus teaches that in relation to the flock, he is the shepherd. In the opening verse of the chapter, a general picture is drawn in which the relationship of the shepherd and the flock is contrasted with that of the thief and a stranger. Last week we looked at the statement of Jesus being the door of the sheepfold. we learned how the eastern sheepfold may be the courtyard in front of the house, or a walled enclosure to which there is a single entrance over the shepherd or the hired servant kept watch. It was into such an enclosure that the shepherd would drive his sheep. In the morning, the shepherd calls his sheep, and through the open doorway, they follow the shepherd, whose voice they recognise. But in sharp contrast to the shepherd, there is the thief who gains entry by craft or by violence. The real shepherd doesn't drive the sheep in front of him, but he goes before them, and they follow because they know his voice. One of the most familiar scenes in first century Palestine was the figure of the shepherd tending his sheep. The shepherd's life was not one to be envied. It was hard and it was constant. It was 7 days a week, 24 hours a day, and in that time he had to face the elements of nature and the danger of thieves and wild animals. Because there was very little grass, the shepherd had to lead the sheep in a constant search for food. Many people who listened to Jesus were well acquainted with the life of a shepherd, and so he used their knowledge and understanding of the shepherd and the sheep to illustrate his own relationship to his followers. The sheep of Palestine were not used primarily for slaughter in the marketplace. Their principal function was that of producing wool for the loom. And so it was that any one sheep might be with the shepherd for a long time. It was common in this case for the shepherds to have names for their individual sheep. Jesus, speaking of the shepherd, says, "The sheep listen to his voice. He calls his own sheep by name and leads them out." Jesus knows people in a unique manner. He knows each one of us individually. He knows us by our name. 2 young people once volunteered to read the Bible to a blind man, and they planned to read through the New Testament. So beginning with Matthew, they encountered a long list of names in the genealogy, and they wanted to miss it out. But the old man insisted that it was read. He said, "God knew every one of those men by name, and he knows me." Jesus knows our needs. We each vary in our needs, but Jesus is able to relate to each one of them. He knows the names of each of us. We live in a world where we are more often referred to as a number and not by name. A number, of course, has no personality. It's indifferent. But our name is personal because it was given to us by those who love us. The Good Shepherd calls us by our name and leads us. But not only does the Good Shepherd call the names of his sheep, but the sheep know his voice and they respond to him. There were, of course, 2 kinds of shepherds in Jesus' day, as we've already heard. One kind of shepherd was a member of the household that owned the herd of sheep. It might be a son or a daughter, as in the case of Rachel. It may have been a servant who was thought of as part of the family. The second kind of shepherd was someone who was hired to care for the sheep. The shepherd was responsible for the sheep. If anything happened to the sheep, he had to provide some kind of proof that it was not his fault. The law said, "If it is torn by beasts, let him bring evidence." And we read that in Exodus 22 and verse 13. You'll remember the story of Joseph's brothers bringing back his cloak covered in sheep's blood. It was proof that Joseph had been killed by an animal. A real shepherd, of course, was born to his task. He was sent out with the flock as soon as he was old enough to go. The sheep became his friends and companions, and it became second nature to think of them before thinking of himself. The other type of shepherd was a shepherd because it was a job and not a vocation or a calling. To him, it was simply a way of earning money. And if he sees a group of thieves or some wild beast attacking the sheep, Jesus points out that he may well abandon the sheep in order to protect himself, whereas the good shepherd will place the flock before himself. The good shepherd doesn't run away. He cares for the sheep and he willingly stays to defend them. They are his sheep. He knows that they are defenceless animals that cannot protect themselves. The shepherd's strength and weapons are the only hope the sheep have. The good shepherd doesn't look after the sheep for monetary gain. He does it because they belong to him and possibly his father. The good shepherd tends the flock with gentleness and with courage, with foresight and unselfish devotion. Jesus points out that the man who works only for reward thinks chiefly of the money. The man who works for love thinks chiefly of the people he is trying to serve. Jesus will not abandon us in the face of the enemy. He provides for our safety. The Good Shepherd gives his life for the sheep, and Jesus gave his life sacrificially on the cross. He gave his life for the lives of others. He lays down his life for his sheep. In the picture of Jesus as the Good Shepherd, there is loveliness as well as strength and power. The ultimate test of love and devotion, of course, is how far a person will go in practicing such love. It's one thing to talk about how good a shepherd may be, or how willing he is to do things, but it's quite another to be willing to risk certain death in order that the sheep can escape. We first read of King David as a shepherd boy. There were many stories of his courage with the lion and the bear that came to ravage the flock. At the risk of personal injury and death, he willingly offered himself to protect his father's flock. The case of Jesus, of course, goes a step further. David believed he did not necessarily have to die in order to save the sheep. But Jesus knew for a certainty that for him to be the Good Shepherd, he would have to die for God's sheep. This was a death where he would bear the full weight of sin for all of humanity. It was not just that Jesus would have to die, but the meaning of his death was also part of his decision. Jesus didn't only say, "The Good Shepherd lays down his life for the sheep." He actually did it. The shepherds of ancient Palestine led their flocks. They led them to green pasture and refreshing water. They led them away from danger. A shepherd has to be a good leader. Human history is filled with stories of love and devotion, of people willingly giving their lives for others. People who run into burning buildings or swim into deep water for loved ones are not uncommon. And Jesus is trying to say that about his relationship with us. He loves us. He knows our name and willingly gives himself on our behalf in an act of obedience. We have to obey God and respond to his love. We need to listen to his voice and follow wherever he leads. God calls each one of us by our name into a relationship with him as our Father. May we in these days recognise the voice of God and be willing to follow him as our Good Shepherd. May God bless you during this coming week. May you be aware of his presence and of his leading in all that this week holds. And we look forward to meeting up with you again next week. Take care and God bless.